Are you Jewish? Can I convert to Judaism? Is your mother Jewish? Now, the reason this is very important is that I believe that the word Jewish doesn't mean what you think it means. Religiously, the word Jewish nowadays means nothing. Religiously, according to the Torah, the word Jewish means nothing. How so? Well, what does Jewish mean today? If someone asks you if you're Jewish, what they're really asking you is your mother Jewish? Or does she identify with the modern day Jewish ethnicity? Not are you religious, not do you keep Torah and its commandments or care to. No, just if your mother identifies with a Jewish or Israelite lineage or pedigree. Now, the reason I think this talk is very important is because we as Jews have the habit of taking developed ideas and then reinterpreting all of Torah and Jewish history by nuance. And I think the best example I could give is the outreach movement in the Jewish world today. The notion known as kiruv. How so? Well, by the fact that the idea that one religious Jew or Israelite should feel compelled or obligated to reach out to other individuals of his ethnic tribe just because they happen to have a Jewish pedigree, when they themselves don't care to be religious, and many times even fight against the existence of God and Torah. This notion did not exist till one particular group, known as Chabad Lubavitch, brought it to our social forefront. Now, why is that? Why is it that in the Torah, in the Talmud, in the works of the Rishonim, the elevated status of an ethnic Israelite, apart from belief and behavior, because that's the attitude taken before the rise of Hasidut and the Kabbalistic ideas that predated it, that even though you may have had a mother who was ethnically Jewish or had an Israelite pedigree, did not mean that you were in any way to be shown special treatment, favoritism, or worst of all, be told that you are special and superior to every other group, race, ethnicity out there just because you happen to exist. Even rational forms of Judaism have become mystified. Kabbalistic thought permeates every aspect, and that it's hard to overlook the successes that the outreach movement has had in bringing people to Torah, in their opinion, back to Torah. That no one could deny. However, not without costing us the bigger price of telling the non-Israelite or non-Jewish world that we elevate blood over ethics, basically by giving sanctuary to every ethnic Jew out there, no matter what he believes or how he behaves. And some would even say that it is this form of thinking that created the notion of a secular Jew to begin with. In other words, it was the Kabbalists that taught that what makes you special to God in some covenant, and in many cases part of God himself, is the fact that you have a Jewish mother, and thus Jewish blood running through your veins. And when this idea permeated the Jewish world, you found many Jews who realized that if it wasn't belief and actions that solidified their status as an Israelite, Hebrew, a Jew, then why do they need it to begin with? So what? So they dropped Torah observance, but kept their Jewish title. And that's why today you can have a Buddhist Jew, a Messianic Jew, an atheist Jew, a communist Jew. You're still Jewish. Why? Because Kabbalah taught that as long as your mother is Jewish, you are in some way religiously Jewish. And this is why the outreach movement to target these individuals and bring them back to Torah was founded by the same movement. In other words, they first gave you the disease, and now they're selling you the antidote. I mean, just look around today. How many people who you know that identify as Jewish are religious? 10%? 8%? 5%? So you're telling me that possibly 95% of everyone who identifies as Jewish is irreligious. How is it then that this Kabbalistic pursuit is not labeled a failure? In other words, every individual that's brought to Torah is clearly a great thing. But if you only teach that Torah or living a Torah lifestyle only benefits those with Jewish blood, you dilute the whole message to wanting to be religious in the first place. You dilute the message of permeating ethics into a godless society. It's clearly not a universal ethical standard. It's an ethical standard that only affects and applies to people in a certain bloodline. As a matter of fact, the attitude amongst our sages pre the Kabbalistic nosedive that Judaism took in the 13th century also believed in outreach, but not specifically to people with Jewish parents. In other words, history shows that when they had the opportunity, when they weren't persecuted for doing so, they had no problem with sharing their belief system with any unbeliever or anyone outside of the covenant. That would include whether you had a Jewish mother or not. So, did they believe in kiruv? Did they believe in proselytizing? Absolutely. The difference is they did it irrespective of the person's bloodline. Now, why did the kiruv movement arise when it did? Well, it predominantly arose in and around the time of the Russian Revolution. It's no secret that Chabad Lubavitch was formed in Russia, mainly because in no other place did you ever find such a high concentration of Jews outside of the land of Israel like you did in Tsarist and what later became known as Soviet Russia, a highly concentrated group of secular Jews. While in places like Germany that gave birth to the Reform movement, an ideology also built off of the Kabbalistic notion that a Jew is a Jew and in the covenant because of his soul, i.e. the Jewish soul, and not because of what he believes in or how those beliefs drive his behavior. We see that the more rational Jews in Germany and the surrounding countries took a different approach to it, and that was one of pushing away of excommunication, not to mention physically fighting them in the streets. Two approaches to the same problem. The problem of classifying a Jew by who his mother is and not on whether he keeps Torah mitzvahs. In other words, it was Kabbalah ultimately that gave birth to the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment movement, a secular movement made up of atheistical Jews who took the notion or the idea put forth by these Kabbalists that they were still Jews, irrespective on whether they kept Torah or not. So they propelled a Jewish understanding, a Jewish lifestyle, a culture built on Jewishness without Torah. Now we see this in America today, in what's known as Jewish comedy. The Marx Brothers, Lenny Bruce, Woody Allen, Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David. A segment of entertainment known as Jewish, but not in any way connected to God or Torah. And how do we know that it wasn't always this way? Well, we don't even have to go that far back. Just look at the words of the Rishonim. The Rambam classifies an atheistical Jew as being kegoy, equivalent to a Gentile. Shulchan Aruch also says kegoy, says kekuti, regarding what we know as a momer lechachis, someone who actively fights against the existence of God with anger. And that's who we're referring to here. We're not talking about Jews who just aren't that religious, but people who actually turn their back on God and Torah and try to encourage others to do the same. But regarding the term Jewish, that's not one that's used in halakha very often. Typically, the word that's used is Israel. Now, the reason Israel alone hasn't gained traction as a term to describe the people of Israel is because if you just call someone Israel, others would begin to think that this is just a national identity, not necessarily one tied to a commitment or a covenant to keep God's commandments. In other words, if someone identified with the covenant in Torah, the Torah covenant, while someone else identified as a Jew, nowadays who do you think they'd consider Israel? The truth is that someone could be technically a citizen of the land of Israel. I'm not saying nowadays, but in Torah times, and not be in any covenant with God. That's apparent. Someone could have Abraham as their great-great-grandparent and not be in the covenant. We see this with Amalek and Edom. Nobody walks around thinking that an Amalekite is in some way also from the covenant, even though he came through Yitzchak, through Avram Avinu. So why should we ever think that just because someone happens to have an ethnic Jewish pedigree, that they are in some covenant with God? because that's what people mean when they say I'm Jewish or he's Jewish. The truth is, the proper term in Torah for what we call Jewish nowadays is being in a covenant with God. Have you taken upon yourself those commandments? Do you strive every day to keep and maintain that agreement, that covenant with the Almighty? If you don't do that, you are considered cut out of the people of Israel. The notion of being lekaret. Now, why are these things never distinguished? Do we really think we have more in common? From God's perspective, with someone who just happens to have a Jewish mother, than with someone else who believes that Torah is true and for some reason is not able to convert because of the politics of the day? The truth is, the notion of matrilineal descent is a rabbinic notion. Now, I believe in what's known as Torah Sheba'al Peh and the oral law. However, we have to make a distinction between what's literally in Torah and what was later developed by the Sanhedrin. As a matter of fact, in rabbinic literature, it actually gives 3 standards for what considers someone as a legal citizen of Israel and thus liable to the punishments of the Sanhedrin, and who isn't. For example, today we happen to hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who taught that it was only by the mother, while there's an opinion by Rabbi Akiva that it's the mother and the father, and there's another opinion in Talmud Yerushalmi that it's the father alone. Now, why wasn't this important to the average Israelite? Well, mainly because according to halakha, according to Jewish law, conversion to Judaism took about a day. That's it. Facing this reality, why would you ever have anyone arguing on whether he's Jewish or trying to prove that he's Jewish or someone else isn't? You wouldn't, because if there was any doubt, you would immediately immerse yourself in front of 2 or 3 witnesses, and the case was closed. Now, because we've made a mockery of conversion nowadays, outlawing it in the vast majority of the world, and making it take years, if even possible, now this has equipped many to point their fingers at those who don't have the title, excluding them from aligning themselves with the notion of Israel as recorded in Torah. They'll say, well, you're not a Jew yet. You're a Gentile. You're not allowed to keep commandments. We're different. We're Jews. This notion is an idiotic one never mentioned in rabbinic literature. The notion of pushing people away just because they happen not to have a Jewish mother. The truth is, Torah itself never makes this distinction of having a Jewish mother or not. So this is why the notion of being Jewish religiously means nothing nowadays. For one, there is no Sanhedrin, so there is no court that's going to put you to death for not having a Jewish mother. And no, having a Jewish mother does not bring you any closer to God or set you apart from some metaphysical perspective like the Kabbalists teach, because they teach that just by having a Jewish mother, this secures for you the later notion of a Jewish soul. And as the Kabbalists teach, that soul is superior to the soul of a Gentile. Now, the Torah nor the Talmud ever speaks about the notion of Jewish souls or Gentile souls. It seems that everyone has the same soul. And it's rather the decisions you make in this life that distinguish you from the heathen world. Conversion is the process of immigration that someone must go through in order to legally be counted as a member and thus be liable for not keeping the laws set forth by the Sanhedrin. That's it. There's nothing spiritual or metaphysical about it. Now, entering a covenant with God, that's what actually counts. The Torah covenant, coming to a place in your life where you decide that not only is Torah true, but those commandments are worth keeping, and placing yourself in the same place where Israel and the mixed multitude stood in Har Sinai, accepting all these commandments. That's what matters. And that's the guide we should use to distinguish others.